record. Well, hi, George. Many thanks for joining us just for a very brief chat about a rather interesting picture that I saw. Now, it was a thumbnail for an article about was it the upcoming season? What was the actual thumbnail?
I think is it not the Happy New Year one? Perhaps?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. Happy New Year. Yeah. And I immediately got onto you and said, "Oh my goodness, that's a great picture. I reckon I can name 7 of those." and I managed to get one of those wrong. My excuse being that I never saw either the rider who it is or the one that I said it was. I never saw them ride for Berwick. Funnily enough, I did see the actual answer ride his ice speedway bike at Berrington Lough many years ago. He brought it along, didn't he, and rode around for 4 laps, and I think the track record was still the Andrew Silver one, 55-1, and he did it like in about 51 seconds, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did a tour of that was his little party piece towards the end of his career, and he was always about 10 seconds faster than the conventional track records around everywhere. Quite something, I have to say. I mean, Berrington Lough really wasn't designed for something like a nice speedway bike.
No.
He's some guy on a motorbike.
Can you see that okay?
Yep, got that one.
And who are we talking about?
Talking about Bruce Cribb there down in the bottom left-hand corner.
With the Drybra race jacket, that's one of the interesting things that you're always able to identify the eras from, isn't it,
Very much so. And it was quite cool when he came to us, albeit he was at the back end of his career. But I kind of think Jim McMillan, Charlie McKenna, Steve McDermott would all be in the same team as him, which was quite some spearhead to have those 4 there, and then built around them. Although strangely enough, one of the teams maybe put together that you thought were going to challenge for League and Cup and never actually did.
Yeah. But I mean, I thought it was Wayne Brown because as I say, I've never actually seen. I've only seen pictures of Wayne Brown, and obviously that's as you pointed out, it's not Wayne Brown at all. It is
Kiwi, of course, both Kiwis. I think there's probably about 2 foot height difference between Bruce Cribb and Wayne Brown as well. Not so obvious when they just cropped into a picture like that. But I think Wayne was a mighty atom, and Bruce Cribb was an enormous Maori guy.
Yeah,
incredible physical presence he had.
Sure. Moving on then. Next on the rostrum here is...
Strangely enough, one that maybe isn't that familiar to me. Is that David Meldrum?
That's David Meldrum, certainly. Victor.
Strangely enough, albeit a Berwick lad, he was an era when I was working away from here and didn't see a lot of David as a rider. No more of a reputation than anything else. But of course, the first Berwick-born guy to become captain of the Bandits.
Yes, indeed. Next to him,
Robert Grant Senior.
Up until recently, I think it was Makowski, wasn't it, that overtook his number of points scored for Berwick. It's into the thousands, isn't it, that they scored?
Yeah. I think Robert would be the first to admit that his was more longevity than anything, whereas Makowski was sort of top order, high scoring. But I mean, strangely, when he first came, I think Felton, he was one of the Felton graduates, Rob, and he first came at the first setting around Shieldfield, and he used to pretend he was on a long track bike, and he'd get his head down and his hand on the back forks down the back straight. He was never that successful at Shieldfield.
Wow.
Strange enough, it was when they went to Barrow originally, after being thrown out of Shieldfield, but then very much at Berrington Lough that he made his name. Not hugely impressive record away from Berrington, but there were times where he was like a number 1 around the Lough.
Well, that's right. And but going back to that Barrow, I seem to recall a video where they talked to him, and they talk about the fact that the previous meeting there, he was unbeaten round Barrow. So
Yeah, I
at
think
one time he was very fast, wasn't he?
yeah, I mean, he was quite a presence as well. I mean, you were a brave man to go around the outside of him, and even braver man to go up the inside of him. Once he got in front, he was pretty hard to get past.
Yeah, and strangely enough, for all his woolly bully, reputation, when you actually speak to him, very shy, very quiet.
Yeah,
It was amazing when when you took this guy off the bike and you actually spoke to him. It was like, yeah, he.
I'll tell you a little story. When I was working down in East London back in the 80s, used to cover Arena Essex and Hackney.
Right.
And I remember Hackney were on the way up north on probably their first northern tour, and the two questions were, where the hell's this place called Berrington Lough, and who the hell is Rob Grant? That's what the southern lads want to know, and I think they found out both. Both were imprinted on their memory after that.
Absolutely. And the eating raw sheep was the rumor, wasn't it? A couple of raw sheep before the meeting, get the juices flowing, and there was no stopping it. And of course, next to Rob Grant is a fellow who obviously in the same team at the same time, and they used to get on like a house on fire. They were great company to one another. Who's on the bike here in the middle?
I think that's one of your favourites, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Mark Courtney, which
Exactly.
all this work done by son Scott, who's the genius who does all the graphics and the social media posts for the Bandits and the Bullets. So it's Scott's composition, this, and that's Dad, who, it'd be fair to say, resurrected a career that was just going a little bit wayward when he came to Berwick. He'd sort of dropped down in the days where you used to have to choose whether you rode in the top division or the second division. Mm-hmm. He dropped down. He'd had a bad time at Newcastle, where he didn't. And I don't think his scoring was desperately bad, but he certainly wasn't the 10, 11 point man they thought they'd signed. And he came up to Berrington and resurrected his career up there. I always thought it was one of the slightly strange things that when they went up into the first division, they didn't take him with them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether he didn't want to go. There was a thing at the time where riders didn't necessarily want to invest in the equipment you needed for the first division. Sure. But I always thought he'd have been he'd have been a second stream stroke reserve, and that would have been a pretty impressive one around Berrington.
Yep. No, it's Dave Walsh and Dave Blackburn and Scott Robson and Kevin Little, wasn't it, that carried on? Yeah. And of course, Rob Grant actually rejoined Berwick back in '91, didn't he? He actually. Rob Grant is actually responsible for the Cup win in 1980. He was in that team. He was in the Cup win in '89, and he was actually in the Gold Cup team of '91. So, I mean, it's talking about longevity. My goodness.
Yeah, very much so.
I recognise the red and white leathers that he's got there, Mark. I would say that is 1988. And I don't know if it's a press and practice thing or whether that's a white helmet colour that he's got on, in which case it would be an away meeting. But I kind of
think it's probably press and practice, because I think in those days riders didn't carry full helmets like they do today. I think if he'd been in white, it would have been a helmet cover normally rather than an actual helmet. So I'm thinking press and practice there as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was obviously sensational around Berwick, but a lot of people remember a visit in '88 to Powder Hall where he secured victory for Berwick against the Monarchs, and did so in scoring a 15-point maximum, including beating Les Collins twice, which even Mike Hunter was, sort of beside himself in praise of Mark for his achievement there, you know. But,
yeah, I think as well, it's worth remembering when he went from Middlesbrough down to Leicester, him and Les Collins were a pretty potent 1 and 2, or top 2 for Leicester.
Yep.
And if Leicester hadn't closed, because I think you'd be the first to admit that it didn't go too well from at Bellevue.
Yep.
But I memory plays tricks sometimes. I kind of think he went for about 25 grand to Bellevue, and that was it. Put that in context. I mean, it sounds pretty lame compared to footballers who go for 130 million these days.
Sure.
But I think that was 5,000 more than Hull had paid for Ivan Major about 3 or 4 years earlier. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of pressure on him to score big at Bellevue, and it didn't quite work for him for one reason or another. But I think there was a time where he was pretty much looked on as our next potential regular world finalist, things like that.
Yep, very much so. Yeah. Anyway, moving on, because we could spend all day talking about Mark Courtney, and I would love to, but the guy next to Mark here is none other than,
that would be Ricky Ashworth, I would imagine.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Again, strange in a way, because I again, somebody I saw from afar and more as an away Berwick away from home. I kind of have a memory that his signing wasn't the most popular with Berwick fans, but he came to become a rider that, for his action on the track, that he was one of the sort of legends. In a terrible way for it all to end for him. Well, but he's certainly one who grew on the fans rather than was welcomed with open arms.
I would say he was one of those Sheffield riders that I used to love to hate. Simon Stead, I would have loved to see him ride for Berwick because he caused us so much damage.
You feel he'd have suited Shieldfield, yeah.
Ricky Ashworth, him had a few ding dongs with Makowski. Obviously, we ended up getting Lee Complin as well because obviously Berwick suited him. I'm trying to get Andre Compton as well. Was always a tough rider, wasn't he, for Sheffield? Yeah. It makes you wonder where what Sheffield were doing right, because they certainly produced some pretty good. Right, I think even Robbie Kessler is settled in Sheffield or near Sheffield, isn't he? And he's
yes, it was a strange one. I think the Sheffield track before air fences is very narrow now, and with modern bikes, it's very difficult to pass at Sheffield. But I think back in those days, it was one of the best racetracks around. And if you could. You needed a certain mentality to race there. And if you had that mentality, then Berwick was pretty easy for you, really. I think a little bit longer on the straights, but the same sort of get your head down and don't really think about what might go wrong.
Sure. But yeah, going back to your business about when Ricky was signed, I don't remember this at the time. I don't think I was really following that much, but your fellow blogger, Sarah Charalambus, must have said or blogged something about, Ricky, and lo and behold, they got him to present her with a bouquet of flowers at the Black Gold. Absolutely brilliant. Whoever planned that one. That's great, isn't it? Eh?
Yeah, I think so. I think he certainly made a good impression in the end. He was a great signing, I think.
Well, hopefully, he was hoping to be up last season at some point with his dad, but I don't think his dad's always keeping the best of health, unfortunately. So we hope that Dad is soon on the mend, and that we'll see Ricky and Dad up at Sheffield at some point next season. Anyway, moving
Yeah,
on.
I think. Sorry, just
Sorry,
one
yes,
last
yeah,
thing on
yeah, sure.
Ricky. I think it's important as well that I think he had a huge influence on Leon Flint.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think he still has Ashworth Racing as well on his Kevlars.
Sure.
I think very much he spent a lot of time with Leon when he was younger and was a great inspiration to him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his track record at Sheffield is probably it's going to be quite difficult to break, isn't it? Because as a lot of people pointed out, that the track is not quite as it was then. They don't put so much dirt on it, and engines are constantly being detuned. So 59.1 might be forever the track record at Dalverton. So.
Interesting to see, because we have the magic transponders this year, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with track records.
Yep, sure. Yeah, yes, I know what you mean. It only needs the guy with the stopwatch to just to be a fraction late, and that might make all the difference. Yeah.
One or two tracks. I'm thinking of Plymouth.
Yeah.
Is it Zane Kelleher, who I think maybe he's only won one race in Britain in his life, and yet it's supposedly the fastest 4 laps ever done at Plymouth.
Yeah.
And you kind of do wonder about some of these from time to time.
True. Yeah. And then moving on, I remember this fella. I remember playing pool with him up at the Grove, and he of course he started off at Bellevue. Didn't do particularly well. Came to Berwick. I think he got to be like a second string. Then the next thing I know, he's off to various other parts of the country, and becomes a real top class rider, didn't he? In places like was he not at Kings Lynn for a while? And
he was at Kings Lynn for quite a while.
Yeah.
I think. You wouldn't say an underrated rider, but I think perhaps somebody whose influence on clubs isn't really reflected by final averages and things like that.
Sure.
He was a hell of a captain, hell of an organizer, very good rider.
Yeah.
But I think he was possibly the last. I'd say the last of the genuine semi-professionals, in that everything he did was professional, but he always saw Speedway as a way of adding to a full-time job. He never actually saw that as a full-time job, I don't think. Whereas now you've got lads who can't even drive the sponsored van they would demand to turn up, thinking they should be allowed to ride in 3 leagues. I think Kevin was old school, if you like, almost a throwback to better times. And I think the last we saw of him, he's back in Australia now, and he's been up sorting out the floods in around Mildura and Victoria. So he's quite a character, as well as a really good bike rider. Quite a character.
Incredible voice. I've never, I mean, obviously Australian, but it was like it's like quite high pitched. And I'm trying to, I cannot think of anybody that sounds like Kevin Dooley. It also at times it sounded like he smokes 60 cigarettes a day, but as you say, just a really, really nice fella. I had a lot of time for him when he first came to Berwick. And then of course he came back, and as you say,
yes, he loved it so much he came back 10 years later. But again, I think a big influence on the current owners and promotion. He didn't just ride Speedway; he knew it inside out, and his thoughts. I think they sometimes talk about having somebody at the head of British Speedway to sort it out. Well, they can never come up with a a finance package for Kevin, he'd be a pretty good guy to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Moving on then. Again, this is a guy who I did see in 1988, but I think that was his last season in the sport, and obviously one of the true legends of the Bandits, because he did win the National League Riders Championship. He wasn't he was also probably a bit like Wayne Brown, not the biggest fella, quite a short fellow. Am I right in saying that?
No, you got me thinking. I don't think you're that short. I think he was more of a traditional sort of, because Speedway riders never used to be that tall. They used to all be sort of 5'7", 5'8" sort of
like
thing.
jockeys.
He was sort of in that that category. One of the Manchester lads, that sort of generation of Dave Morton, Chris Morton, Peter Collins, Collins brothers, they all came from that part of sort of Manchester. They all grew up on the grass tracks there. And then if you look at the 1970s British Speedway, most of the English lads came from that sort of Northwest grass track scene. And Steve was, he first of all, he'd done Wolverhampton, alongside Hans Nielsen, which is how Hans Nielsen ended up riding at Barrington in his testimonial. I think they stayed good friends. Right. And then it was the Wolverhampton management who reopened Edinburgh, and he was one of the ones who was there when Edinburgh reopened in '77. Right. Didn't really do much there, and swapped down to Berwick, and we swapped possibly Dave Trounston. Sure. And it was one of those moves that worked brilliantly for both riders. I mean, Trounston went on to be like an Edinburgh legend, having been no more than a reserve at Berwick. Sure. And Stevie Mack came in and did the same job for Berwick. He sort of went from a half decent second string to basically a number one, and a genuine number one. And then with Wayne Brown developing at the same time, that was the basis of the 1979-1980 side, which was so good. Although both him and Wayne Brown missed cup finals because of injury, which was a shame. But then Steve kept on going at Barrington. And I think arguably the best Berwick rider of all time over a period of time. Sure.
I mean, to have won the National League, was it '83 that he won it?
Yeah. I mean, it was a hell of a meeting to win. I mean, Wayne had won it in 1980. He won it 3 years later. Sure. And it was like the top. It sort of had the sort of feel that you could never afford to assemble. And a big night out. Yeah. And Berwick riders hadn't done particularly well at that in the past. So big night of celebrations.
Yeah, indeed, I think it'd be fair to say, though, wouldn't it, that often with Berwick, it wasn't a case of assembling a top-heavy team, although, obviously, 1989, we had two riders finish the season, 10-point averages, but it's not really been the Berwick way, has it? It's going to be interesting. Chris Harris, obviously, this year, and one could say that for all the hype and the excitement of having Chris, and it was great having him, we still finished very, very low down in the league. So it makes you wonder, is it the best way to go with a top heavy side? But I'm liking the looks of the team we've got this year. Just above Steve McDermott, we've got number 3 here. Now, he, with his back to us, it's going to be very difficult to identify, but I believe
that would be Mr. Jai Etheridge.
Yes.
I reckon this is probably the 2018 Kevlers.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, he's spent a fair amount of time at 3 that year. I'll be honest, I sound as if I know what I'm talking about. It's a bit of a cheat. I was looking through some old photos doing something else the other day and sort of came across that Jai in that sort of suit and thinking, oh yes, yeah, I remember that as well. Yeah. So it was fortuitous, shall we say, that that was there. Otherwise, that's one that might have stumped me, I'll have to say.
Yeah.
I kind of think that's the one most people have tripped up on.
Yes. Although a lot of people think that the one doing the wheelie is Chris Harris. I would just
Now that would have
speculate.
that would have been a Berwick team if Chris Harris had been at number 6.
It would have been some team.
That would have been a hell of a team. I think that's young Mr. Flint.
I think that's Mr. Flint. Yes, which
the only
brings us on
man
to...
who goes wider than Bomber at
yes,
first turn, I think.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're we're really looking forward to obviously next season. It can't start soon enough, and it's funny how every year they put the team together, and apparently all the other people over there in sort of internet land rubbishing the team. And as I said to Marty, I said, you know what it is? I said it's not the riders that Berwick have chosen; it's the fact that it's Berwick.
Yeah, very much.
It wouldn't matter what team you put together. It's Berwick,
Yeah, I mean, it's like this idea that Poole is some legendary Man United type club in British Speedway, and it's just not true. They've won the last few. That's fine. They dropped down from the Premiership. That's fine. They are what they are. But I don't think they've put together any better sides than Berwick do. But if you put that Berwick 7 and said they were Poole, then they would be favourites for the title on Tinterweb. But because it's Berwick, then 7th. Everybody always says we're going to finish 7th. Yeah.
It's. I mean.
And in fairness, it's been true quite often as well.
Yeah, I mean. We've enjoyed our ups and downs. The biggest thing, of course, is that you're looking at all these riders that have ridden us over the years, and we don't know who the heroes are of the future. But at least at Berwick, we have that future. Fans of Eastbourne and Newcastle and Swindon, up and down the country. There's tracks that have Coventry hopefully will be up and running again soon. But we might be a little old Berwick, but we're still going strong from strength to strength.
54 years, which I think something like that, 54, 55. It's an achievement to do, and it's an achievement that shouldn't be ignored. I think being a Saturday track is becoming harder and harder to attract riders to. I mean, we are the only championship Saturday track now. And I think this is one of the big problems that traditionally any day other than Saturday has been disastrous for Berwick crowd-wise. But Saturday is becoming more and more difficult to get riders to commit to a full season. I think the side they've put together this year, I don't see any rider who's not capable of adding to the average they're on.
Exactly.
Some quite dramatically.
Yes.
And I think somebody like Thomas Jorgensen, if he gets dialed into Berwick, could become well nigh unbeatable around there.
Absolutely. Coming back and having been a bit of a hero the first time round. I remember seeing him riding. I'm sure both live and on Sky Sports, and thinking what a fantastic rider. And also, although I've never met him, speaking with the fellow, the Shouty brothers, they've spoken to him quite a bit, and they talk about what a really nice fellow he is, and dare I say it, there were one or two riders out there that cause certain divisions that maybe aren't the great team team men that you really need. But anyway, that's for another day. Moving on then to the one that we've left to last. I think you can tell by the fact that he's got all this tartan on his sleeve. I don't think it's difficult to identify this particular rider.
Luke Crank. Sorry, Greg.
Luke Crank, that's right. How many world championships has Bartosz won?
Yeah, I think he probably wins 2 every night in his dreams.
Yes, exactly, the one and only Greg Blair, and I mean, what a fairy tale that is, you know, to have been involved in the Bandits back in 2010. I remember him, you know, in the Speedway style, they're talking about him joining, and when he was just, you know, 16 years old, and really back then didn't get a fair crack of the whip, but he's back, he's doing what he does, and that's great to see, isn't it?
I think so. I think he's quite somebody, and I think he's ideal for a club like us in that he's so involved, he's so open, he's so friendly. Yeah. If you ever have, or if anybody ever has a few minutes, if you get yourself on the internet, John Somerville's photographic collection, put in Greg Blair, and you'll find a sequence of him at Redcar being catapulted down the home straight like a rag doll. And to think that he still wants to race after something like that is phenomenal, and probably says a lot about the mindset of Speedway riders at times. But he's had some big shunts in his time, but he's still, I mean, let's face it, he's doing it for the love of it nowadays rather than the money. They couldn't. I think in him and Leon, we've probably got 2 of the most committed clubmen that we've ever had captaining the 2 sides, and I think they typify Berwick, I think, as a club and as a set of people, perfect captains for the club, I think.
Absolutely. Well, George, I must say cheerio, and thank you very much for your insight into that. Well, I think it's an excellent photograph. I'm the thumbnail. I'm sure that you know, other people would say, oh, but what about such and such, but you know, you can only fit so many on, and for me that was a very, very good collection. So well done there, Scott. You've done yourself proud there, and thank you, George, for talking us through all of those riders. I'll say cheerio, and we'll catch you all again soon.
Yep, no problem.
And I'm just gonna